Živijo, jaz sem Boštjan Ahbar in to je podcast podrobnosti 27. epizoda. Anže Tomič, kje si?
Evo me doma, stari. Evo me doma.
Dogaja?
Vedno dogaja.
Zadnji si se nekaj ful smejal, si bil tak ponosen, da si se ful smejal s kolegi. Kaj je bilo to?
Kaj sem se smejal? Ne vem,
nekaj si snemali in si se ful smejal.
Ja, ful fajn.
Prav pohvala, da si se ful smejal.
Ja, ta zadnje glave, te, ki smo jih z Luzarjem posneli, Common Brothersih, so bile, ne vem, res smo se imeli fajn, no. Tako še belka ponavadi, tako se imamo zmeraj fajn, in seveda nekaj ekstra, tako da ja, pejte to poslušati.
No,
smo se o Common Brothersih pogovarjali.
Se splača počekirati, ja.
Res je.
Drugač pa 26. epizoda je bila z Boštjanom Videmškom. Predvsem smo govorili o situaciji v Siriji. On je bil pred par tedni oziroma 10 dni nazaj. Se je vrnil tam in je bila kar težka debata. No.
Milo rečeno.
Ja, je bilo kar nekaj feedbacka nazaj. Vidim, da ljudje take debate, da ljudi take debate privabijo, tako da smo s Boštjanom nekako zmenili, da se na vsake toliko slišimo in da nam malo updata situacije po teh kriznih žariščih, kako po svetu, kamorkoli pač on odpotoval.
Ja, kako bo šlo vse narobe.
Ja, tako nekako, da nas še malo prestraši. Jaz takrat še nisem spal, zdaj se sestavljam. Tako da se splača počekirati. Danes pa z nami, oziroma danes bo pa zopet podcast potekal v angleščini. In sicer imamo gostjo iz Amerike, Cara Santa Maria. Je science communicator, se splača poslušati, da vidite, kaj to sploh pomeni. Je pa tudi pisateljica, producentka in pa televizijska osebnost, precej znana na področju znanosti v Ameriki. Znana v smislu, da je dosti na televiziji in da nekako je posrednik med znanstveniki pa med folkom, nekako posreduje te novice in pokomentira. Tako da nas zihar čaka zelo zanimiv in zelo dober podcast, dobra debata. Anže, drugače pa kje se nas najde, kje se nas lahko posluša?
Podcast je valjda na aparatu.si, tam so še ostali podcasti, lahko celo mrežo pogledate, drugače smo pa tudi v iTunesih, bo kakšna ocena, če jo daste tam, ful dobrodošla, ker tako še kdo lahko najde tale podcast. Da se pa tudi celo mrežo Aparatus podpreti, to pa naredite tako, da greste na aparatus.si/podpri, pa na Facebooku smo. Ja, spomnil sem se, bum.
Pa še enkrat hvala vsem za majice, jaz sem tudi dal svojo sliko. A bo kak kolaž? Anže,
delam na kolažu. Tako, ko bojo ljudje tole slišali, bi mogoče mogel že biti na prvi strani ta drugi, ta večji. No? Tako da,
bravo.
Nam preveč obljubljo, ampak se bom potrudil, da bom vse skupaj spravil.
Važi. To je to. Cara Santa Maria je pripravljena, na vezi smo direkt z Los Angelesom, tako da Anže, štarti zadevo. Okay, so we have Cara Santa Maria here, American science communicator, writer, producer, television personality. She's the host of her own podcast, Talk Nerdy, which is an awesome podcast that I listen to, and has done a lot of stuff in her career. I won't be talking about. I'll let Cara tell more about herself, her career, and how she got to a point where she is now. I'm sure, Cara, you have an interesting story. Being a science communicator sounds awesome, but you can tell us more about that. So, Cara, welcome to the Details podcast.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
So, tell me a little bit about your career, how you came to a point where you're now. I mean, I think if you like science, like I do, like an amateur, I don't deal with it daily, but I read about it and I watch documentaries and stuff. I think your name is going to come up sooner or later. You're a so-called science communicator. Mm-hmm. But how does one become science communicator? And tell me about your career, your life, how you got to a point where you're now.
Sure. I mean, it's a bit of a strange journey, and I think that from meeting a lot of other people who have similar careers to mine, I've learned that everybody's path is very, very different. There's not really a textbook way to become a science communicator. I get this question all the time from people who are interested in doing what I do for a living. What did you study in school? How did you decide to do it? And yes, I am starting to see that at least in American universities, there are some interesting tracks for science communication that are being offered. But for the most part, a lot of people come into this career path through really varied decisions. So mine personally was that I was studying science in school. But really, when I first started in university, I was deathly afraid of science. I've told this story before. It's actually not much of a story, but when I was an undergrad, I took the bare minimum science courses that you're supposed to take. I had to take 3 different lab science courses. I took oceanography, sounded easy, wasn't at all, made a C. I took astronomy, sounded cool. I'd get to look at stars. And at the time I was a smoker. So I loved the idea of like having a lab that was outside and we were in the smokers group. So we would, smoke cigarettes and look through the telescope. And then the third class I took, I like to embellish and say that it was called paleontology, a class about dinosaurs. I'm not joking. In the course guide, it was called dinosaurs in all capital letters with an exclamation point. I took dinosaurs in college. It was very exciting. So at that time, I had no idea that science was going to be a path for me. I was a vocal jazz performance major. So I was a jazz singer in high school. That's what I went to college for. That's why I chose to go to the university that I went to. The University of North Texas is a very good music school. I quickly realized that it wasn't fun for me to sing anymore when it became an academic endeavor. And I decided to become a psychology major, honestly, because it sounded easy. And I was a pothead. Like, I had no interest at that point in working very hard. But through psychology, I became interested in the brain. Through psychology, I became interested in the experience of individuals who had dealt with brain damage and how that translated to behavior. I had an opportunity to do a master's thesis and work with an incredible clinical neuropsychologist. And I learned a lot more. And I realized, hey, this is what I want to do. I want to go back to school. So I got a master's degree after that in biology with an emphasis in neuroscience. And then I went on to start a PhD in clinical neuropsychology, which is kind of a marriage of those two fields. I decided to study that because I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do for a living yet, if I wanted to be a clinician, if I wanted to be a lab scientist, and that gave me the best of both worlds. It was a PhD program, so a very research-based program where I'd be doing basic animal research, but it had a whole clinical component where you do internships and externships, and you learn how to work with patients. So by the end of it, you're a research scientist with a clinical focus. I never made it to the end of it, though, because about a year in, I realized I don't really like this anymore. I love teaching, but I kind of don't like doing the lab work. And so I started to fall into step, and I started to come into my own, and I realized that probably my talents were best used communicating science, teaching courses, talking to people about why it's so important, why I love it, translating laboratory research for a global audience and maybe a non-technical audience. And in doing that, I quickly realized, maybe I'm not going to be a bench scientist, but I should go into this broader field of science communication. And that's what I did. I ended up doing work in television, on the web, podcasting. All the great things that have come along with it have all been kind of random and amazing opportunities, but that's really where they came from.
Okay.
And you're from Texas, right?
I'm from Texas. I have a big-ass tattoo of Texas on the back of my arm.
Honestly?
I do.
Where from in Texas? I lived in Houston actually for almost 3 years.
Oh, I'm very sorry. No.
Why?
No, I'm kidding. I'm actually from Dallas, from North Texas, from a small town. Well, it's not that small, but from a suburb called Plano, right outside of Dallas.
Yeah. Okay, I know what it is.
Yeah, culturally they're a bit different, but it's still Texas. Houston, I love Houston, and I love the people from Houston, and I have a lot of family in Houston. I personally cannot handle the weather in Houston.
It's humid.
It's so humid.
Crazy.
It's like a muggy swamp. There's so many mosquitoes. And North Texas is totally different. It's much more similar in some ways to LA. In other ways, it's very different from LA. Obviously, there's no ocean, and the weather is really unpredictable in North Texas. It could be 100 degrees one day, 50 degrees the next day. Those are Fahrenheit, people. Mm-hmm. Sorry. We use a different system. We use the not as good system in the States.
Yeah, wow, that's like really like awesome of you to admit that.
Oh yeah, it's totally ridiculous. The English system of measurement makes absolutely no sense. In the sciences, everybody uses metrics, and so I have a couple benchmarks in metrics that I really understand. Obviously, in the metric system, freezing, boiling, room temperature, body temperature, they all make sense to me, and they're good markers. But when it comes to, the weather outside, it's a little bit difficult to convert in my head because I'm so used to using Fahrenheit. But if they're
that's I think the weather is the only one where Fahrenheit makes more sense because
it's more specific.
There's more room.
Sure.
You can make it. Because with us, it's like within 5 degrees, it's basically too hot and just right.
Exactly, yeah. In Fahrenheit, 72 we would say is room temperature, but at 74 you might be like, oh, it's a bit warm, But the English system of measurement makes no sense. It's not based on units of 10. It has no relationship to reality, and it's all just held on to because of tradition, which is idiotic. There's a ridiculous band, and it's not really a band because it's one dude that I love named Atom and his package, ATOM, and his package being his guitar and his synthesizer. And he's like this super nerd that really borrows from punk rock culture. He doesn't really make music anymore. I think he's a high school math teacher, but he has type 1 diabetes, so I think it got difficult for him to tour. But he has a great song about the metric system where he really just piles on about how ridiculous it is that we don't use it.
Can we find it on YouTube? Because
totally.
We'll find that. We'll add that to the webpage.
Yeah.
You guys are about to have your minds blow. A lot of people really don't like Adam and his package, and they think I'm insane for listening to it. But if this is your kind of music, you're going to be like, "Holy shit! Why did it take so long for me to find this?"
All right, we'll definitely check it out.
Awesome.
You mentioned, I mentioned your podcast, and you also said that you got into podcasting. And since we are on a podcast now, what's your opinion on podcasting in general, and how it changed media, especially in the last, let's say, 5 to 10 years or something like that? And what do you personally get from it? Obviously, hosting great guests, and learning from them. But why do you personally do it? Because I listened to the Joe Rogan podcast, but he was telling you that you should do it, and you ended up doing it. But why did you actually jump into it, and what do you think about it?
Yeah, that was really just the catalyst that helped me get off my ass and do what I had wanted to do for quite some time, was when Rogan recommended it. But I was already asking on air, should I do this? And of course he was like, hey, tweet her, tell her she should do this. And I got an outpouring of support from Joe Rogan fans and followers, like hundreds, maybe even thousands of people tweeting to me, messaging me saying, you've got to do it, we'll listen. And that really gave me, I think, the sort of the security to know that I could do it. But I had been thinking about podcasting for quite some time. And to be honest, there was a time in my life when I started this, which was, so it's October now. Earlier this year, was it just earlier this year? I think so. Last year, I started working on a television show. It's an American show. You would not have access to it if you're international, called Take Part Live, which was a live daily news show on the Pivot Network.
Pivot, yeah.
Yes, it was.
Is that a new network?
It's a new network. Yes, it was.
Okay.
It's the production company Participant Media, which you may have heard of. They're a film financing company and do a lot of really groundbreaking, really socially conscious films. So they did Food Inc. and they did Waiting for Superman and all of these amazing, they did The Help, all of these amazing films that have a really strong message. And then they decided, hey, we want to do television, and we want to do television that matters. And that show in many ways really mattered, and it was very close to my heart. I was very close to my co-host, and the experience, apart from one specific problem, was very important to me and meaningful for me. Unfortunately, there was a person who had a lot of power on that show, the person who ultimately had control over the show, our executive producer, whose name I won't mention, who was a very difficult person to work for, overtly sexist, had a lot of power struggles with me, really worked hard to quote unquote put me in my place on the show. And you can see a transformation on this live daily show over the 9 months that I contributed to it, starting in the middle of last year up until I think about March or April of this year, where I was told what to say. I was told what I shouldn't say. I was told how to dress. I was told how to do my hair. I wasn't allowed to wear black anymore. I had to wear shorter skirt. It was insane. It was like, wear a shorter skirt, wear higher heels. Very transformative.
Sooner or later, they would change it into one of those Fox News typical American blonde, TV personalities.
It was really odd because that wasn't the vibe of the show. It wasn't what the network wanted, and it wasn't who I was, and it wasn't why they hired me. But in many ways, I felt over the course of this show, whether it was out of angst or spite, or I'm not sure what it was, but there was a lot of bad blood, and just really, it was not a comfortable situation for me. And I tried every day to stay true to myself, but I felt more and more that I was losing who I was on air, and that I was second guessing myself. And when I would be told, hey, when you say this, you come across so snobby, or when you say this, you come across so ditzy. Oh, maybe I am. Maybe I do. Maybe people don't like me. It was very much getting into my head, which I think was the plan, to be honest, which was a shitty situation. And I've learned a lot from it, but I was young, and it was my first live daily studio show. So at this time, I was losing myself, and I was really kind of recommended by a lot of core people in my life, Joe Rogan being one of them. Hey, you have a strong personality. You are who you are. Your voice is important, and this is a great outlet for you because nobody is there to produce you. Nobody is there to censor you, and you get to be pure. And it doesn't even have to be journalism. It can be if you want. It can be opinion if you want, or it can be clean conversation, clean interviews. It's whatever you want it to be. And in many ways, at that time in my life, that was incredibly appealing to me because I was afraid I was losing who I was. And this was a really solid way to gain it back. It really, really gave me perspective at the time. So for selfish purposes, in many ways, podcasting saved my voice because my voice was getting lost.
Mm-hmm. No, I completely understand.
Well, that was really poetic there at the end.
Oh. Well, thank you.
Yeah. No, but I totally get what you're trying to say, and I don't know. Even from my own personal experience, a lot of things you said, I can kind of agree to that. Especially giving you a voice. I'm in a different I quote unquote work in a different field, being a pro athlete, but still, it gives you a chance to speak your mind, to say your opinions, and not to be just that guy that's on TV for the duration of the game or the quick interview after the game. It gives you a chance to talk more and to express yourself more. So,
and for you,
definitely what you're saying.
For you, it seems like it gives you an opportunity to be thoughtful and heady and intellectual, which is something I'm not sure about Barcelona. I'm not sure about Spain in general, but here in the States, I don't think that there's an expectation that professional athletes have brains. I think that they're treated in such a way that they're expected not to. They're not expected to engage in discourse about politics or about philosophy or about anything of meaning. And so what a great opportunity for somebody who's like, hey, I'm also somebody who thinks. Like, I have a voice.
I mean, thanks. Yeah, but that's in the way that I look at it. Yeah, it gives me another opportunity to like I said, to express myself, to give my opinions, and also to meet new people and learn from them. That's
sure.
I think, another thing, and share that with people. I think that sharing with other people conversations like this one now, I think if there's one person that's going to learn something from this, I'll be happy, and then share the word forward, and so on and so on and so on, and that's how it goes,
Sure, and I mean, for me, again, I think that. You mentioned, the blondes on Fox News. I'm glad that you're able to bring that up because sometimes I'm not sure how much American culture translates. I know what I know from visiting. I've been around the world and I've visited many places, and so I see what I see, and I know what kinds of, generally what kinds of stereotypes are held. But yes, that Fox News model of, a woman who's very leggy, who reads off of a teleprompter, a script that somebody else wrote for her, who doesn't have a thought in her head. Unfortunately, many of those women aren't even that. Those are strong, bright women who have worked very hard. And I think that there's a culture in media of putting women in an expected role, and we still haven't broken out of that. And unfortunately, most of the time, the people in power the people who are running the networks, the people who are on the board of the major networks, and the people who make the decisions about casting and make the decisions about the goals and the voice of the show are men. And those men have a very specific idea of how the women on the show should behave, how they should appear, how they should come across. And it's not easy for strong American female journalists or female voices, pundits, whatever, to be able to be their own person because there's so much pressure to be manufactured.
But do you think that's changing though? Like, are people kind of getting tired of the same old, news with more or less same people or that appear the same, and turning more into podcasting and let's say alternative media or whatever you want to call it? I mean, I certainly have a feeling that it's changed. I'm not going to say a lot, but it has changed. I mean, it's changing, and people are opening their eyes and are turning into to find more about news or whatever from alternative media, not just the 7 o'clock news on the local TV station.
Well, I think that it is changing, and I don't want to sound like, Debbie Downer. I think it's changing, but it's not changing quickly enough. I think that there's a lot more smoke and mirrors about the fact that it's changing. And yes, there are huge swaths of people that listen to podcasts. But when I look at my podcast numbers, which are growing every day, and I'm so appreciative of the people who support the podcast, who tune in, who listen. I absolutely love my listeners. You compare those numbers to a Fox News broadcast or a CNN broadcast, and it's non-comparable. The truth is, we like to talk about how there's this movement of change, of underground, of new media, but the numbers don't add up. People watch Fox News a lot. Yep. And the reason that Fox News plays to the advertisers and I shouldn't just say Fox News. MSNBC is just as guilty, and lately we've seen that CNN is embarrassing about this. They don't do legitimate report. I mean, I'm not saying they never do. There's some very good reporting, but for the most part, they're not giving the people the news that they need to hear. They're giving the people the news that they want to hear. And they are appealing to the lowest common denominator. They're appealing to fear. They're appealing to salaciousness. And the reason they do it is because they have the ratings to prove that it works for them.
That's like you quoting Anchorman 2. That's the plot of Anchorman 2, I think.
I love Lamp. Sorry.
I just saw it like 2 weeks ago again.
It's really funny.
Yeah, it's too. Like, I actually like the second one better because it's that whole cable news formation. It's just awesome.
There are aspects of the second one that I really like better, but then I got to tell you that whole West Side Story street fight. It reminded me of the episode of Family Guy where he gets in the fight with the chicken, but it's like the whole fucking episode.
Yeah,
and you're like, it went on too long, people. Like, this is a bad SNL sketch.
Yeah, when Will Smith shows up, it kind of gets weird. I'm gonna give you that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, but I think like there are like a bunch, like you said, like swaths of people like tuning into alternative media. But like I think that wave basically needs to swell, and it's going to be a long time before anything gets supplanted.
It does. It needs to swell. We need to see more young people who I think have that strength in numbers. I think that we need to see more women. Oh my God. I looked at my statistics recently on the podcast, and I get, in terms of listenership, something like 79% male and 21% female. And I was told, I'm not going to lie, I was told by an advertising company that I was working with that those were high female listenership numbers for me, that advertisers would look at my podcast as if it were a woman-friendly podcast. That's a bad thing. It's a bad thing when 21% of my listeners are women, and that's considered high.
That's interesting. Andrzej, your whole podcast network, do you have any idea what the numbers would be? Male to female ratio?
Like over here, the breakdown I get is basically by platform. So I'd actually have to do a survey.
That's the way that I knew. But, it was based on service.
But if you had to guess, I'm wondering, because we never really talked about this. If you had to guess, what do you think?
Well, we do have a show where it's 4 women talking about movies.
That's one
imagine
of them.
That must that has to be the other way around.
I don't know. It'd be funny. Maybe it's 30-40% women, but apparently it's endemic in podcasting. Podcasting itself does not have a female audience. They're just not there.
Interesting.
It's the same. I mean, YouTube is a little better, but it's still predominantly male. And you see it also in America, at least on the science leaning net. I say leaning because there's like hardly any science on them anymore. But if you look at Discovery Channel, Science Channel, Nat Geo Wild, they're heavily male. I remember,
honestly,
yeah,
okay.
I remember one time there was a while where Google was doing this thing. It wasn't Google Analytics. It was like Google Insights, or maybe it was Analytics, where you could log in. And it would tell you based on all of the scary things they do to track you, like all of those, NSA scary things. It would tell you who they thought you were demographically based on your internet searches. And it thought I was a 65-year-old man. And that's
okay. I do not want to see your search history. That just sounds creepy on a couple
I know
of
it does,
levels.
but you know what? The truth is, it's just because I'm a science journalist, so I read science. I read science online,
right, yeah.
and apparently only old men read science. That's bad. We need to change that.
Yeah.
Oh, this just has like all kinds of echoes of Gamergate and all of that stuff. Like,
Yeah.
it just gets depressing.
It does. It gets so depressing. It's one of those things where you try so hard to stay out of it because you're like, this isn't my fight. But at the same time, when you see how vicious people can be, it's hard to sit quietly. It's hard to do.
I just keep imagining they're all 16. That's how I like process
14.
it.
Or
14. Yeah, I'm just hoping they're all 14 and they have no idea what they're doing and who they are.
Exactly.
That's my hope. That's I think the best case scenario.
And that they'll, the frontal lobes will develop. They'll have sex. They'll have sex.
Yes, they'll find a girl.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They'll learn about respect. And all of those things that you learn through trial and error, and they'll become functioning members of society. We'll see.
Yeah, but they just keep getting replaced by douchebags.
Exactly.
But I did not know that podcast skewed towards men, because I do a really techie show in English as well, and I just talk to Mac nerds all the time. So I imagine that's where it gets really male heavy. Yeah. But I just figured like a sciencey type show.
Oh, science is, fundamentally it skews towards men. And then the problem is podcasting in general skews towards men, which I'm not sure I really understand why. But that being said, I don't listen to that many podcasts. I'm not a big podcast listener. It's not really the medium for me that makes the most sense. It's very seldom that I have uninterrupted time to listen. Once in a while when I'm in the car for that long, but I can't really listen while I'm working out. I need kind of music that's upbeat. Otherwise I'm like, oh, I hate this. I'm not like motivated like most people are to go to the gym. So I have to convince myself that it's something I want to do. And it's hard for me to find time to listen to long form conversations.
Okay. So, what does that mean for you? Since you're like a science communicator and a woman, how does that
I'm an atheist.
The reception you get.
Yeah.
Well, over there that's a big deal. Over here that's kind of
I know. Oh my God, over
kind of situation.
Over here it's like I don't know what to liken it unto for you guys. But I have a friend or a colleague, I should say, named AJ Johnson, who's big in the skeptic atheist movement. She's a black lesbian atheist.
That's awesome.
I know. She's amazing.
That's every box is ticked down.
Exactly. And I'm like, you are such a badass, because I feel like I'd be looking over my shoulder every day. Like, that's the world that we live, or I should say, that's the country we live in. Sorry to drag you guys into it.
But I actually wanted, that's why I actually wanted to ask you, but I was kind of afraid, because that's why I said you're from Texas.
Yeah,
right?
Born and raised.
Because I imagine all of that is even worse in Texas, or is that not a fair stereotype?
No, it is. It is even worse in Texas. But the thing that I think a lot of people forget is that what ends up happening is that the group of people who are progressive, who are liberal, who are, left-leaning, atheist, pro-gay rights, all of these wonderful things, they're everywhere. They're all over the country. They're just marbled in. And what you find is that they're in many ways more passionate when they come out of the South, because they're having to be that way in the face of major oppression. They're having to do it against the grain and against the norm. Whereas when you meet somebody in like LA or San Francisco and they're like, yeah, I'm liberal, they're oftentimes what the term we use is limousine liberals. They're sort of like, wishy-washy about it, because they've never felt that, they've never had their backs against the wall. They've never needed to stand up for those convictions, because there's not like an angry mob with pitchforks surrounding them. You know what I mean? I grew up Mormon. I was raised in a family the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Mormon church. And you weren't allowed to be gay. You definitely weren't allowed to be an atheist. Until the 70s, you weren't allowed to be black. I mean, this is a very oppressive.
But magic underpants.
Exactly, they'll save you from everything.
Yeah,
and so
basically,
this is the culture I grew up in, and it's the culture that, in many ways, is still I'm heavily entrenched in. Because even though I live in Los Angeles, even though I left Texas when I was 23, 24, moved to New York, and then moved to Los Angeles, my whole family still lives in Texas. My father, his wife, their children, they're all still Mormon, and I'm expected to maintain some semblance of a relationship with these people. I work very hard to patch up a lot of the difficulties that came out of me leaving the church at 14 and me not communicating with my father for many years. But when I go back home to visit, I'm actually scheduled to go home in December for the first time in 2 years. I forget. And then I walk off the plane and I realize again how much Christian privilege there is, how much obesity there is, how much, I don't know, just how many conservative values are so expected that you forget that you're oppressed when you've been away from it for so long. It's almost completely flipped in Los Angeles. I'll say things. I feel really bad about it, actually. I have a lot of friends who are scientists and science communicators. I have a very good friend who I work with who is a strong science communicator who's also Christian. And I literally forget that that's a thing. So,
oh yeah, because LA.
It's LA, yeah. So I remember we were all going to the Mount Wilson Observatory up in Pasadena to look through the 60-inch telescope, and we had planned it on Easter, but none of us realized it because none of us celebrate Easter. And so we're looking at the calendar, and somebody goes, "Oh shit, we're going on Easter." And I was like, "That doesn't fucking matter. Like, nobody cares." And like this one person was like, "Well, I need to go to services or whatever." And I was like, "Oh, sorry." Like, I just don't, I'm like, nobody believes in God. That's ridiculous. But then I forget, oh yeah, like 99% of people in the South do.
Yeah, but
that was a
really
bullshit.
Like
no, that's a bullshit statistic.
No, I know it's a bullshit statistic, but like I don't know. I'm always kind of wary because you sort of get this, the typical Southerner, like American Southerner. You have this stereotype where it's just all like the Bible Belt and all that stuff. Yeah. But like, because I've never been there, and like Boki just played for the Houston Rockets, so I doubt he went to a bunch of churches down there.
No, but he probably heard everybody thanking God for the wins that they got, right?
Well,
thanking Jesus,
a lot.
thanking God, praying.
It's a big difference. I mean, being European and going from Europe, the first time I moved to the States was to Houston, so it was very typical Texan, southern city. And then going from there to live in New York, huge difference in mentality of the people. I'm not going to say the culture, but yeah, you can definitely see a difference, especially someone that was as neutral as I was, coming from Europe.
Well, and the funny thing is, there's a stereotype about Texas versus New York, right? And in many ways, it totally holds true. Mm-hmm. Texans are much more, I don't know, cordial. They have like better manners. They've got superficial kindness, that like neighborly vibe.
They do. It's almost fake, but
fake. But if you grow up with it is genuine.
Nice.
It's very nice. It's very genuine. It's just you're raised with manners. You're raised to be kind to the people around you. And in New York, there's none of that. But
no.
But you think, okay, but in New York, it's metropolitan and people are open-minded and they're not as religiously oppressed, right? So I am teaching at university in Texas, at the University of North Texas, and I'm teaching biology and I'm teaching about evolution. And then I moved to New York to work on this PhD that I started. And I'm like, oh, it's going to be so cool to teach about evolution in a New York university, I've always taught in public schools, so like state or city colleges. Mm-hmm. And so... Mm-hmm. Oh, it's going to be so much different. It's going to be so much different. So I moved from Plano, Texas to Queens. I'm living in Forest Hills, Queens, and I'm taking the bus every day to Flushing, to the Queens College campus of the City University of New York. And I realize, like, half of my class are Orthodox Jews. And this is a culture that I hadn't really gotten to know in Texas because the Jewish culture is just not very big. And so I had a few Jewish friends, but they were all very kind of like reformed. They were really liberal. And I thought of like Texas Jews as Democrats, And I didn't realize because they were. I didn't realize that there were like really Orthodox Jews that were just as religious as the Bible thumping Christians. And so I get there and I'm teaching evolution, and these kids are like, "You don't actually believe this, do you?" And I'm like, "Oh God, it's not a belief; it's a scientific theory." And so I have to like go into the whole thing. And literally, people are teaching me things that I didn't know. Like I'm trying to show a kid how to use a microscope, and I put my hand on his shoulder, and he's very kind, but he's like, "Professor, like you're not allowed to touch us." Like we're unmarried,
Wow.
and so men can't be touched
Wow.
by women. And I'm like, what? Like there are these cultural things that I do not understand because, of course, I'm like a blasphemer. I'm this atheist who doesn't give two fucks about like religious sort of dogmatic stuff. I very much respect Jewish kind of secular culture the same way that I respect anybody's secular culture. I respect a lot of the horrible things that a lot of my Jewish friends had relatives that obviously went through, and kind of why they maintain these cultural norms and these traditions. But when it comes to the religious shit, I don't respect much religion. I just don't.
Mm-hmm.
And so, there's a huge fight in America right now between Sam Harris and Ben Affleck and Bill Maher and this big group of things over Islam.
Oh, yeah. I saw
And
that.
it's like everybody's up in arms about it because what ends up happening is you have this liberal guilt, this cultural sensitivity where it's like, oh, I can't say anything critical. I'm so boxed into a corner because I'm so concerned. And it's true. There is horrible racism that happens in America, especially right now towards Arab nations. Horrible racism. But people mix that up with intellectual criticism of religious dogma. And so they become so overly sensitive about the racism, which is a completely understandable position to be in, that they become permissive about really bad human rights violations because they're like, oh, well, I'm a cultural relativist, whatever. And in my head, I'm like, no, you don't fucking stone a woman to death for cheating on her husband. I don't care what you believe. It's disgusting. So I have a very different view about kind of religious influence and civil rights than some liberals do in America.
But still, like science and religion throughout history have been, let's say, I don't know, contradicting, fighting each other, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, a little bit at odds, for sure.
Yeah, like exactly.
a little bit.
But in your line of work, you probably have a lot of situations where you have to deal with one or the other. I mean, how do you? Is your belief that eventually, science and religion can coexist, and if how, like how does a person navigate through that? Because it's like you said, it's a very touchy subject, and
I still have a relatively moderate view. I used to be what a lot of people would call like a new atheist. Maybe they would throw Sam Harris, Chris Hitchens, that group of people, maybe Bill Maher, into this group, or Richard Dawkins, this group of people who are like, they might say they're vitriolic about it. They might say, they have a zero tolerance policy and that all religion is terrible and blah, blah, blah. And I used to very much feel that way. I'm an atheist. Religion is stupid, blah, blah. And then I realized, wait a minute. What I do for a living is I communicate science. I don't communicate atheism. My atheism is personal. I speak up for my atheism because I see atheistic rights in America as a civil rights issue, just because it's a very different culture in America. And if you come out to say that you're an atheist, you're never going to hold public office. People look at you like you're a leper. It's really bad. Like there's a lot of Christian privilege in America. So I try to speak up for atheist rights in that way, but I have no interest in converting anybody to disbelief. Like that's crazy. But I am interested in promoting scientific thought, in promoting the scientific method, and improving science literacy in our country, which we desperately need. And what I realized one day, which it seems like I should have come to this a little sooner, was that probably the worst way to convince somebody that scientific thought is the true path to knowledge is to tell them that they're stupid because they believe in God. Mm-hmm. It's just not that effective. So I started to really break apart, why do people believe? What are their beliefs like? And I realized that I think a lot of people that are religious are not fundamentalists. They're not biblical, like they don't believe in a literal translation of the Bible. And in many ways, they have a more progressive stance. I know a lot of people that are Christian or Jewish that totally think gay marriage is is legitimate, that the Bible doesn't contradict it. They don't pick and choose which Bible verses to live by. They look at the Bible as if it's a book of parables, a really great theological and kind of philosophical book of important stories to learn things from. And I think that if you're that kind of a religious person, there's absolutely nothing wrong with being religious and being a scientific thinker. I think those things can very much coexist. If you're an adaptive person who is progressive in thought and who understands that you're constantly going to have to look at the science and adapt the religion to be able to keep up with new understandings in science. But if you're a fundamentalist who sees things in the Bible that are completely contrary to scientific evidence, and you hold on to those things in spite of the fact that they have been debunked by modern science, you're not going to be able to reconcile those things in your head. I personally can't reconcile God. It doesn't work for me. I don't believe, and I'm not spiritual. I don't think anything happens after you die except that the worms eat you. I have a very staunch kind of materialist view, but there are many people who don't see the world that way, who have religious inclinations and are also very committed to scientific thought and inquiry, and they've figured out how to reconcile it. Who am I to say that they shouldn't?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so can I just ask you, because judging from your background, right? So you're basically now an atheist and a science communicator, and just yay science and all that stuff. Exactly,
yeah.
But when you were the last time you were on Rogan, you basically advocated universal healthcare, which where you're from, that's like Satan talking.
Oh, totally, just, yeah.
No, but how did you avoid basically not being the woman with the Ron Paul t-shirt?
No, I know.
How did you avoid? Because I imagine coming from a Mormon background, right, and then just rebelling against that. I think that whole, Ron Paul 2012, whatever the hell the slogan was, that should have been you, right?
Totally. And I think that what ends up happening too, a lot of times, is that you find people who, I mean, let's use religion as an example of this. And I know it sounds like I'm meandering, but I promise I'll get back to your point. People who were born in Saudi Arabia, or people who were born in Texas, or people who were born in Chile, or whatever, they grow up to be the religion that they were born into. That's just how it is. You grow up.
For the most part, for sure, yeah.
Yeah, you're surrounded by a certain school of thought, and you are ordained to be that way. It feels that way from God. Oh my God, I'm the one true religion. They all fucking think they're the one true religion. And they don't have a choice in the matter because it's what everybody around them thinks. And when you are forming your earliest neural connections, when you are interacting with the world around you, and you're becoming a fully formed human being with emotions and thoughts and executive functions, your environment is grossly entangled with that process. It's very difficult to tease out exactly what led to what. So it's to be expected that most people, and the data show that most people think the way their parents thought. Most people are complete and total products of their environment. They're the same religion. They're the same political leaning. Why certain people rebel, why certain people don't look or sound the way that they should, quote unquote, because of how they grew up, is beyond me. I, for example, don't have a Southern accent. You might be able to point out certain things. I do say y'all, and I pronounce and I pronounce certain words kind of weird. Like I say insurance instead of insurance. That's been pointed out to me many times, but it's like, okay. But if you listen to my sister talk, she talks like this, and we grew up in the same family. Why did that happen? I don't know. Did I make a conscious effort at 6 years old not to develop an accent? I have no idea. I ask my 6-year-old self, but it's a very strange thing that there's some conglomeration of factors, be it environmental, be it intrinsic. There's a personal journey that people go on, and sometimes two people can stand in the same room and get the same evidence presented to them, and they interpret it differently. So I have no idea, first of all, why I left the church when I was 14, why I felt compelled to push back and say I don't believe in God, because I didn't, why I tried really hard to be a good Mormon and a firm believer, but no matter what I did, I didn't feel the spirit, and I have no idea why I latched on to incredibly progressive principles. I'm not even a Democrat. I mean, that's way too conservative for me. I'm definitely more left-leaning than that.
Okay, honestly, yeah, because that was my take. Because when I listened to that episode,
yeah.
I was like, what? You're basically European.
Exactly. I know. It's so weird. And the thing is, American politics used to have that flavor. If you look back at the Democrats of the 60s, if you look at a lot of things pre-Reagan, you saw that if we are going to be dealing within the two-party system, at least that two-party system represented two really firm ideological camps, progressives and conservatives. And progressives had reasonable platform. It was about overhauling things that weren't working. It was about civil rights. It was about taking care of the little man. And you looked at conservatives, and they also had a reasonable platform. It was about being industrious and taking care of yourself and making sure that you were fiscally responsible and that you worked hard to make sure that your family could stand on its own 2 feet. And both of those groups understood when government intervention was necessary. Both of those groups understood regulations. And then what happened is when Reagan got into office, we started to see a shift. I'm not blaming it all on Reagan because it's happened progressively since then, but that middle point started shifting more and more to the right. And so even the Democrats are very centrist now, and the Republicans are literally off the reservation. Like, they're just insane. And both parties became, through a series of horrible court cases and rulings by the Supreme Court, both parties became more and more indebted to big multi-conglomerate corporations. And really, our governmental policy in America is which business interest has the most money and can give the most campaign contributions to the most influential people. They always win. All of the legislation that's written is written to appease the people who funded their campaigns. Politicians don't actually write laws anymore. They just campaign full time. And it's a function of money being equivalent to free speech with the Citizens United ruling. But it started long before that, when there were no caps put on, or when there was no real regulation put on campaign finance reform. It's a huge problem in this country.
Yeah, and the super PACs.
There should be there should literally be no allowed money in politics. If we completely overhauled the system so that our elected officials, all of them, our legislators and our executive, our president, could not campaign with funds from businesses or individuals, we would have a totally different government in this country.
Well, yeah, but money's free speech.
Exactly. Yeah.
You guys
Citizens
messed
United.
up on that
Oh my God. Yeah. Citizens United was the worst Supreme Court decision that was ever made.
Yeah, because basically it all comes, like, at least from what I've read, like, and what we were taught, actually, because I'm a poli-sci, I actually studied political science. That's where it really got off the rails.
Oh, completely. And that is a textbook definition of activist judiciary, which it should not happen. The judiciary is the third, because our governmental structure, don't get me wrong, is fucking brilliant. I'm a constitutionalist to the T. I love the United States Constitution, and I think it was incredibly well written, and I think that it's been amended because historically people understood too, oh, we live in a different era. Now we can amend it to fit the vibe of the times. And the amendments make perfect sense. They tried to fucking prohibit people from buying alcohol. It didn't fucking work. They overturned it. Originally, the Constitution was written in a time when it was an incredibly racist country. Not just the country, the entire world was. Slaves, black people were considered 3/5 of a person, which was disgusting. That was amended. They realized this is fucking disgusting. They grew up, they were progressive, and they changed things. It's a living, breathing document, and it's based on very important fundamental principles, which are that everybody is equal, everybody has equal rights and an equal say, and that the government is represented by the people. And the way that we can prevent any one group from having too much power, like in many monarchy societies, is that the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judiciary will have different roles, and they'll have checks and balances on each other. When everybody starts working in cahoots, and when the judiciary starts to legislate from the bench, starts to make decisions that will impact laws, not because they're looking at, how do I interpret the Constitution, because they're saying, oh, if I make this decision, then this is going to be the outcome, and that's a political agenda I have, that's a fucking problem. It's a huge problem. And it's not the way the
and
system
Republicans,
is supposed to
The
work.
Republicans, the last two Supreme Court justices, right? No, the last one was a Democratic appointee, right?
Because
the woman, right? I forget her
yeah,
name.
because
Like
Obama's been in office now 6 years,
Yeah.
so he's been able to do that. But there was a long stretch of Bush before that, then Clinton, but then there was Bush before that.
So they are Alito and the Chief Justice, right? Roberts. Never forget the names right?
There's
those.
there's a bunch of terrible justices on the Supreme Court right now.
Yeah, you guys are screwed, basically.
Oh,
like,
completely.
I don't know how that gets better. Like, that does not get
Oh,
better.
I mean, and that's the thing about our system is that the justices basically die. They have to die before there's a new seat that opens up. So, I mean, it takes a while. It takes a while. I mean, some of them actually retire. Like that has happened. Sandra Day O'Connor retired. She was amazing. She was a Reagan appointment. But I mean, Scalia, holy shit.
Yep.
Scalia.
He's just gonna be there.
Oh
right?
my God.
He's not
And
leaving.
he's so old. I'm just looking it up. He was born in 1936. He's so old.
Honestly,
Yeah.
he looks way better for like a guy that
No,
old.
36.
Like,
Yeah, he's old. He's an old man.
Oh wow.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And he's been a justice for 28 years.
And done nothing wrong since. Okay.
All right. To move away a little bit from the.
Hey, yeah, let's talk more about
religion and
wonky
politics.
American politics. Yeah, no, sorry guys.
We're going to turn into a real political show here. But Cara, which area or which field of science is the most interesting for you? What do you like to work on the most?
Yeah, so
because it's a pretty wide science is a pretty wide how to say term. You know,
science is huge. So
exactly.
My focus is neuroscience. That's what I got into academically because I was really interested in human behavior and how it's reflected in the brain. I have a very strong sensibility, and it's not uncommon with modern neuroscientists that the mind and the brain are the same thing, that mind is an emergent property of the brain, that, for example, mental illness, which is an important field for me, is biological illness. It's fundamental to problems with the brain, and that we should be approaching psychiatry and psychology from a biological medical perspective. So that's really fascinating to me. One of the earliest things I read was The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat by Oliver Sacks, which is an incredible book of clinical tales about people with fascinating, devastating, beautiful, and inspiring cases of brain damage. And it really shows how tenuous it really is for all of us and how much our personalities are shaped by the way that our brain works. And so this book, if you haven't read The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat, you're really missing out. I very much recommend you pick up this book. It changed my life. It might change yours too. But the cool thing is, as I got into science communication and science journalism, my horizons really expanded. I was no longer just allowed to talk about the brain and the things I'm comfortable and safe knowing about. I had to report on space. And it was like, oh, fuck. Remember that astronomy class I took where I smoked a bunch of cigarettes in college? I have to remember things from that. No, that's the great thing about being a journalist is that you get to learn with your readers and with your viewers. So I've been really blessed to be able to go out on trips. You know, I went to Alaska to learn about genetically modified salmon, and there's a chance that I'll be visiting Antarctica soon. And I get to, learn from amazing, astronomers and amazing chemists and biomedical scientists in fields that I don't know anything about. And I get to ask them cool questions and learn about what they do. So I'm very lucky that even though I'm not trained in other fields of science, I've been able to kind of, scratch my curiosity itch a little. The one field that I have to say I'm just like a total fangirl of is paleontology. I love dinosaurs. And if you guys could see my apartment, like the view behind where I'm sitting, you would see that I just have a bookshelf full of like dorky dinosaur toys. I have a dinosaur tattoo. I've literally never studied paleontology except for that one class. Dinosaurs in all capital letters. But I love them. They're a fascination from childhood that I never lost. And I partially attribute that to the fact that I've always been something of a materialist. I think it's innate in me. It was hard for me to try to believe in God. I don't remember ever believing in Santa Claus. I have a hard time watching television shows with fantasy components. I was never compelled or emotionally interested in unicorns or, monsters or dragons.
So you're going to tell me you're not watching Game of Thrones?
I don't watch Game of Thrones.
Oh my God.
That's what everybody says. But the thing is, for me, dinosaurs are dragons that actually existed.
Well, yeah, but we're not going to go into that.
I know, it's a different thing. I know. It's a hard time. It's a hard thing for me to suspend disbelief. It's something I've been working on, honestly, because I want to appreciate the fantasy culture that a lot of my friends do. I mean, I'm a nerd. Yep. It's like I'm surrounded by this all the time. I need to learn to appreciate it. But there is something so beautiful to me about the paleontological story. It's probably the greatest detective story of all time. The Earth has all these amazing clues buried deep within it from a time that we simply don't have access to, and we get to, like a modern day Sherlock Holmes, put together all of these clues to understand a world that we will never be able to live within, and it's a beautiful thing.
Okay, Cara, the hot topic, to say like this, lately has been Ebola and the whole spread of the virus and so on and so on. And following some of the U.S. media, I mean, it seems like there's a mass hysteria over there about Ebola. How? I mean, I saw, I think, one or two of your interviews or TV appearances that you had on this topic. And can you maybe talk about it here and share with our audience your opinion about it and your view about it, and how dangerous is it really, and how afraid should we be of Ebola?
Sure. So, I mean, the first thing I'll say is that it ashames me that my country, it makes me feel guilty that the American media only gave a shit about this horrible crisis in West Africa as soon as one of our own was infected. Like it somehow, it was covered, but not to the extent that immediately when an aid worker was going to be sent back to an American hospital near the CDC, people went fucking ape shit. And then more recently, when a man actually traveled here from West Africa and then showed signs of Ebola later, and recently he passed away, which is very sad. He was in Dallas, Texas. People, like, I got a text from my mom my mom and I were talking about my trip to go home. And she just said the most astute thing, because she was saying people are flipping shit in Dallas. They won't go near the neighborhood where this guy lived. And she texted me something that said, ignorance and fear are, I think it was something like, ignorance and fear are a deadly combination. And it's so true. Like, this is a function of people not understanding the difference, for example, between how infectious something is and how contagious something is. This is a function of people looking at human beings as if they're somehow different if they're not from your tribe, which is absolutely disgusting. And this is a function of the media really pandering to our most base fears and concerns instead of actually communicating truth. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not concerned about Ebola in my backyard at all. I shouldn't be. I shouldn't be wasting resources on that. I'm not concerned that there's going to be an Ebola epidemic in the United States. Our healthcare is absolutely stellar. We know exactly what to do. We know how to quarantine individuals. And yes, it's incredibly unfortunate that one of the nurses who was working with this man who recently passed away from Ebola in Dallas, we just found out that she became infected.
She was like, her part of her neck or something was like exposed, or I read something, but I'm not sure. It's just like maybe negligence or
right, or it's a mistake. You know what I mean? It's like you try your best and mistakes happen. Mm-hmm. It's incredibly unfortunate, and I really hope that she pulls through. But the truth is, we're not going to see then 10 more people get infected, then hundreds of people. It's not going to happen here because we have protocols protocols in place, and we don't have some of the cultural blocks that are causing Ebola to spread like wildfire in West Africa. The reason Ebola is spreading in West Africa is because the resources aren't there. We didn't get boots on the ground early enough to try and quarantine the originally infected individuals before they started traveling all over the place. And there are cultural blocks. We don't have a problem with, and I hate this term because it's honestly a racist term, we don't eat bushmeat in America. We eat wild game, and all of a sudden that's sophisticated. And in Africa, if they eat bushmeat, then it's like savage. It's just a horrible thing. But we don't have a risk of eating apes because we're desperate for food that may be infected with Ebola. So right there, we're not going to see the kind of zoonosis happening in our country. We're not going to see the original infected index cases. Like you're always going to have that in Africa. Even after this Ebola crisis is diminished, another Ebola case will come up because somebody will tangle somehow with wildlife that's infected with it. Right. And the hope is, again, that we can kind of contain it. But secondarily, there are cultures in Africa, there are kind of traditions of, and I shouldn't say in Africa, that's very vague and broad, but in these West African nations that are affected in Sierra Leone, in Liberia, in Guinea, where individuals, for example, it's customary to touch the body of somebody during funereal proceedings. Well, you cannot touch the body of somebody who died of Ebola.
Right.
You will likely get sick. Right. And they do it anyway because it's a custom. There's also a problem with fear mongering where, there are ideas that, for example, the doctors brought in Ebola because they're trying to steal your blood. This is something that's been told around different villages, and people become afraid. Also, look at it this way. You're an individual. Somebody in your family gets sick and then they die. Somebody else in your family gets sick and then they die. Then doctors, European doctors, American doctors start coming in and taking people away from your house. They come in something that looks like a spacesuit. They spray a bunch of chemicals. They take those people away and they never come back. Or when they come back in a body bag. Over and over and over. And then they come for you. Are you going to want to go with them? This is a problem. It's a problem of education. It's a problem of historically having so many lines crossed when we communicate with indigenous peoples and not trying to understand their culture and how we can work with their culture instead of working against their culture to communicate some sort of quote unquote Western medical agenda. And because of this, it's out of control in West Africa, but that literally has nothing to do with the efforts to contain Ebola that we're seeing in Europe and America and what we think of as more westernized or first world nations where we just have the resources to contain this thing, and we don't have a lot of the same issues in the field that these Doctors Without Borders, Ebola hospitals have. And if you have access to it, there's a great American program called Frontline on PBS, which is our public television. It's probably one of the last bastions of like incredible investigative journalism in America. And they did it's only a half-hour piece about Ebola, but they went and visited one of these Doctors Without Borders hospitals. And you see the faces of individuals that contract the disease. You know that certain people die. You see certain people survive. And it takes away some of the fear. Don't get me wrong. It's incredibly scary. You have to be very cautious if you're in a situation where you're at risk. But if you're not, then you have to understand that you're not. You're just not at risk. But seeing the face of somebody who has Ebola and seeing that they look like they have the flu, they don't look like they're not bleeding out of their nose and their eyes and their ear. There's this cultural kind of hot zone Richard Preston thing that happened, outbreak, contagion. And people think of these inflated sort of fictional scenarios as being real. I also would recommend, and I mention this almost every time I talk about Ebola, if you haven't read it yet, read an incredible book by David Quammen called Spillover. The book is not just about Ebola, it's about zoonosis in general, which is a term that refers to when an infected population of animals spills over into human infection. So when we can get some like swine flu or, when we can get a disease from an animal. But Ebola is, I think, one solid chapter or one unit in the book. And he describes it beautifully. He talks about it eloquently. It's fact-based. It's very measured. And this is before the outbreak, by the way. So he doesn't talk about, the most recent cases. Now, I'm not saying that people shouldn't be afraid, and I'm not saying that people shouldn't, protect themselves, but I think that we have to be rational and we have to be reasonable, and mass hysteria does not help. And we also have to know the difference, again, between how infectious something is and how contagious something is. Ebola is not that contagious. You can't get it from the air.
Right, and it's never gonna how to say
it's never gonna become airborne. That's
airborne.
Yeah,
exactly,
that's like a media fear. I don't know where that comes from. It's conspiracy theory fear. There's like one published story, one published journal article about a monkey getting Ebola from a pig when they never were in the same enclosure. But that pig, there's all that tells me is that when a pig sneezes, it's got a bunch of snot and it can spray it all over the monkey's face. Like, that's not something that we're seeing. It's not like SARS. It's not a respiratory syndrome. So it's not that contagious, but it's highly infectious, which means that only a small amount of the virus can make you very sick and can possibly kill you. So if you are exposed, then you're in a grim situation and you have to get treatment right away. So you've got to be careful if you're near anybody that could potentially be exposed, and you have to quarantine for those 21 days. It's very important. But if you look at, for example, that situation where the man unfortunately passed away in Dallas, one nurse got ill, which is so sad, and we're all very upset about it. But at least only one nurse got ill. All of the other doctors that worked on that patient, all of the people who came in contact with him so far are healthy.
Right, and we look at all this, and like you said, it is sad, and it's really unfortunate. And like you said, hopefully, the people who are infected, they pull through. But if you look at all the statistics about all the other health problems that people have in USA, because like you said before, when you mentioned Texas, overeating or obesity, and heart diseases and lung cancer and so on and so on. And then one Ebola case comes through, and it seems from over here, it seems like there's almost like a panic over there. That's what I'm trying to say. From
there
Europe,
is. It's because there's a. I mean, I know this is the wrong word to use, but there's a sexiness to it. The media can show that picture of the Ebola virus, and they can talk about, it's a hemorrhagic fever, and people have internal bleeding, and they dramatize it so much, and we have an emotional response to that. But the truth is, not once have I really seen a strong story other than the frontline piece about the lives of the people who are actually affected. Not once am I seeing an empathetic coverage of this massive humanitarian crisis that's occurring in West Africa right now. Maybe we should be a little bit less concerned about whether or not, oh my God, am I going to get Ebola because I take some random flight from JFK to LA? Like, stop. You're not the fucking center of the universe. Like, you're not going to get Ebola. You have literally no risk of that. But there are people right now in West Africa that have an increased risk of coming down with this disease. And if they do, they will likely die, which is a very, very difficult and incredibly sad situation. And I would like to see more aid. I would like to see more attention drawn to that. And I would like to see the entire world band together around these global crises earlier. I would like to see us be concerned about people, even if they're not, quote unquote, our own people, even if they live halfway across the world. If there are people that are suffering and we have the opportunity to help, I think that we should. I think that we have a moral obligation to do that, and not just because a white person gets infected. That's my soapbox. I'll get off of it now.
Well said. Well said. Cara, one more thing before we wrap this up. I just, when you mentioned earlier that you might travel to Alaska and I think
Antarctica.
But you also, I think you mentioned that you've been to Alaska and you looked at the salmon, the genetically modified salmon, and I remember that I listened to one of your podcasts when you talked to one of the specialists or scientists, or how I should say, that's working in this field. And as an athlete, I'm always thinking about eating the healthy food and avoiding the bad food or whatever you want to call it. But from what I was listening to the podcast, what kind of stuck out is that not necessarily all genetically modified food or organisms are bad, and also that not necessarily all the eco or organic food is great. It's kind of like a gray area. in between.
Oh, completely. I think that this
can you
idea...
maybe like clarify this a little bit, that because it's not just when you go to a grocery store that people, I mean, at least I was like this up until I listened to the podcast, that whenever I saw a genetic modified sign, which we have in a lot of stores in Europe, I would just look away, and when I would see something organic or eco, I would just grab it right away. You know, can you maybe,
and that's
like,
all marketing.
Yeah.
It's marketing.
I mean,
it's a way for companies to learn how to make money. I mean, there's a great thing that's going viral right now that one of my Twitter followers forwarded to me, and it's like a little Jimmy Kimmel sketch where they went out to a farmer's market in Los Angeles and interviewed people at this farmer's market, and they were like, do you avoid GMOs? And they were like, of course. And they were like, why? And they were like, because they're bad. And they said, why are they bad? Like, tell me what a GMO is. And not only did they not know what the word stood for, they didn't know anything about it. So they just knew it was bad. Mm-hmm. And this is a big problem with science literacy. And I don't think it's specific to America. I think it's a global problem.
Yep.
Genetically modified organisms, or I should say more specifically transgenic organisms, which is what most people are referring to when they say GMO, because all organisms at this point, not all, but most are genetically modified. They've all been crossbred over, you know, like agriculture's not quote unquote natural.
Over like over hundreds or thousands of years.
Oh,
it's not
hundreds of thousands of years. Exactly.
Think, right?
No.
Yeah.
But transgenic modification is a very recent, well, semi-recent phenomenon, last few decades. And this specifically involves going into the genome and either extracting or adding specific genes that confer certain kind of functions, certain phenotypes to the organism. So maybe I want to make an organism more hardy. Maybe I want to make it spoil later, or, you know, have a thicker skin, be pest resistant, you know, whatever the case may be. That's what I'm working on.
And that especially comes into play in the, like, the areas that have food shortages, right? Like, I mean,
completely.
Like,
I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, there are large corporations that are doing this, and why are they doing it? They're doing it to make money.
Exactly.
Like, of course.
Yeah.
But there are also incredibly good uses, and I always try to liken this unto, like, for example, big pharma in America. And I'm not sure if this will translate for you guys, but there are a lot of people who are really upset with the way that pharmaceutical companies are run in America. They're able to market to people individually. They hold patents for years and years and years, and they make so much money at the expense of people's health. But nobody throws the baby out with the bathwater. I've never heard somebody say, I don't trust big pharma, so I'm never going to a doctor again. I'd rather just take herbs. No, that's insane. And I think people have the same weird knee-jerk reaction with genetically modified organisms where they say, I don't trust Monsanto, so I'm not going to eat GMOs. And it's like, yeah, I don't trust Monsanto either. They have business practices that I disagree with. A lot of those claims are overblown, though. A lot of it is propaganda. And so I do implore people to please do your own research. And if the article you're reading is on the website www.gmoshorrible and you're going to hell if you eat them.com, it's probably not the best source. I just made that up, by the way. So do the research, try and inform yourself. But just because you don't like this company doesn't mean that you should throw the baby out with the bathwater and be against the process. Genetically modifying organisms is a necessity. It is a global necessity to feed a growing population, to make sure that we have fresh food that's not spoiled, that's not being eaten by bugs, and that we can transport across the world so that you can have your precious pineapples even if they're not growing in your ecosystem. So it's like, in a lot of ways, I feel like the people that complain about genetically modified organisms are... It's a first world problem. It's kind of a yuppie person problem. And because of that, I mean, I'm always wanting to educate and inform and have, you know, a really, I think, an intellectual discourse. We can have strong arguments. If you want to talk about labeling, that's a different issue than talking about whether or not they should be commercially available. But the truth of the matter is, I want to see somebody who is living in one of these places, let's say like Liberia or Guinea or Sierra Leone, who's anti-GMO, because I'm telling you, those arguments aren't popping up in those kinds of places.
No, I was this summer. I was in Chad. I was in Africa on a UNICEF mission to see the area and to basically gather as much as video material for different kind of campaigns. And That's why I find this connection. The people over there definitely would not complain whether it's a GMO or not. They're desperately
No, can you imagine?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
you go to a local farmer and you say, okay, these seeds, grow rice. These seeds grow rice that's fortified with vitamin A, or these seeds grow tomato. Well, there are no GM tomatoes yet on the market, but let's say these seeds grow corn, but these seeds grow corn that are resistant to pests.
Mm-hmm.
What are they going to choose? They're going to choose the one that gives them a better yield.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to choose the one that makes a healthier product. And the reason is because the fundamental goal of farming is to feed people. Now, if you want to complain about the fact that the U.S. has corn subsidies and those are conferred to these different seed companies, and these seed companies are patenting their seeds and all this bullshit around this problem, which I have philosophical arguments against, that's fine. But don't simplify it. Don't say, oh, it's because GMOs are bad. There's no nuance in that argument. There's no context. And it's putting a wrench in a technology that is literally saving lives. And that's why it matters so much to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's important. I think especially, like I said, it comes into play. The poorest areas when it's whatever it's hard to grow food, but the growing population all over the world, needs needs food, needs more and more. The only problem that I really have with GMOs and the companies is the way, at least from what I've read and what I listened to, is the way they quote unquote enslave some of the not pharmacists, but people who work in farms, just because they have to buy their seeds and have to be dependent on the seeds. And
and again, that's a problem in some ways. That's a problem with monopolies. And so
yes.
It's up to a government to bust monopolies. That's what we need to have regulations for. The truth is, nobody has to buy a product unless they don't have any other options. So this seed company who has this seed, if there's a mom and pop seed next to it that doesn't have those genetic modifications, nobody's saying you have to buy Monsanto seed. Buy the other fucking seed. The reason farmers buy Monsanto seeds is because Monsanto seeds work. They buy them because they're able to get a reliable product out of it. Now, if they're in a situation where you're right, they go to the seed store and there's nothing else on the shelves, that's a problem. Mm-hmm. But that's not the fault. In some ways, it probably is the fault of the company, because the company has probably got their hands again in the legislators' pockets. But it's the fault of an entire system that's allowing a monopoly to thrive, which is very detrimental for a thriving economy. So that's a different argument.
Yes. No, I understand.
But the seed itself there's not been one legitimate published study that shows that it has any risks to health or human safety. Yet people consistently report that GMOs are unhealthy for you. And they're literally making that up. They're making up. It's total propaganda.
I'm not gonna lie. That's how I am. When I go to the store, I grab the organic
exactly
whatever.
Exactly. Well, the next time you look at like a can of Coke, it'll probably say on it all natural. Like these are just buzzwords that help them sell their product, and we've got to remember that. We've got to not be such dopes when we go in as consumers. We've got to educate ourselves so that a green leaf on a package doesn't make us buy the thing that costs $3 more. Mm-hmm. That's the exact same food,
And which
you're basically paying for the green leaf on the
exactly.
And which fruit was it that it's not genetically modified? Strawberry or something?
There's apparently a lot. Yeah, like there's no genetically modified strawberries on the market. I learned a lot when I sat down with Kevin Folta. He's the researcher who studies or who does GM research in Florida. I learned a lot sitting down with him because there were a lot of things that he told me that I wasn't aware of. I didn't realize that golden rice actually never made it to the places where it was supposed to go because Greenpeace effectively stopped it.
Yes,
they had a big campaign not to allow golden rice. Exactly. So there were like millions of people who were negatively impacted because golden rice was never made available. And I also didn't realize how few fruits and vegetables are actually available as GMOs. The problem is they're mostly staple crops. So if you look at America, like wheat, corn, and soy, that makes everything because we basically eat human kibble. We eat carbs that are made out of wheat, corn, and soy every day. And that's another issue because we have ridiculous like corn subsidies in this country. So corn is cheaper than like it's like
there's this awesome documentary, was King Corn.
Yeah,
So
no,
like, that
totally.
is awesome.
It's like
haven't
learn
seen it.
about
Insane.
that and find something to be mad about. Like it's like don't blame the GMOs. Like it goes a lot deeper than that.
All right, Cara, I couldn't say thanks enough. I mean, it's this has been a real pleasure to talk to you, and
course.
Yeah, thanks.
and learn a lot of new stuff. And I learned more about you, throughout this podcast than any other that I listen to. So it's completely different once I actually get a chance to talk to you. So thanks so much. Thanks for taking your time.
Of course.
And expect a new listener from Europe or from Slovenia joining your podcast audience. So
very cool.
We'll spread the word for sure.
Great. I'm always really excited when I look at my stats and I see that I have a growing international audience. And so thank you so much if you're listening to this right now. If you are interested in going to like iTunes or Stitcher or whatever RSS reader you use, Talk Nerdy with Cara Santa Maria. I'd love to have you. And also, on Twitter, because everybody's on Twitter now. Yep. I'm at Cara Santa Maria. So follow me and I'll say hi.
Awesome.
Cool.
Yeah, like it did to me. I was really surprised when I tweeted you. I was like, for sure she's too busy. She doesn't know what she's going to answer. But it did right away, and we got in touch, and here we are talking. So thanks a lot.
I love the internet. It's so cool.
It's awesome.
It's magic, basically.
It is. It really is.
Anje, where can people find us? Where can people find this podcast and all that stuff?
The site is thedetailspodcast.com, and then we're also in iTunes. So if you leave a review there, that'd be great. And that's pretty much it, right? That's for the English stuff. That's pretty much it.
Yeah.
And we're also on Twitter.
With the Slovenian version, we have a lot more.
Because there's like a whole network and all of that. Yeah.
Well, I will tweet the hell out of this. I will get you guys. You get me some Slovenian followers. I'll get you some American listeners.
We'll do that. We'll do that. For sure. Anyways, I'm at Bokinahbar on Twitter. Anje, you're English Twitter feed.
You say it. Just say it. Because I'm done with the jokes.
Cara, he has the weirdest Twitter name. Twitter.
What is it?
It's at AtomicXX. And 2 X's, right? XX.
Yes, 2 X's.
I'm like, thank God he doesn't have 3, because that would be like just a weird,
At least it's easy to remember.
Yeah. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, so everybody go check out Talk Nerdy with Cara Santa Maria. Awesome podcast, Cara. Thanks again.
Thank you.
We'll keep in touch. We'll definitely let you know when this podcast comes out. It should come out on Monday. It's like 4 days or something like that. So
great.
Thanks again. And
thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye to LA. Thanks.
Bye.
All right, bye. Evo, to je bila Cara Santa Maria. Pogovor sicer v angleščini, tudi zato, ker je to del najnega, kaj bi rekla temu, mednarodnega podcasta, The Details Podcast.
Mednarodnega double life najnega podcasta.
Ja, The Details Podcast je podcast, ki ga delamo v angleščini, tudi na 14 dni. Tisti, ki mogoče imate možnost, da tega ocenite tudi v iTunesih ali pa malo deliti to besedo z vašimi mednarodnimi kolegi v tujini. Drugač pa meni je bila ful zanimiva debata. No, jaz tudi marsikaj mnogo se naučiš, pa se mi zdi, da je res ona taka kul punca. Tako da hvala sem, da ste poslušali. No. Anže, te je bilo kul, ne?
Ja, kul, ja. Pa poslušajte njen podcast, ker je dejansko fajn.
Ja, ima
tako ful dobrega gosta ima.
Talk Nerdy podcast se reče, ja. Dobro ima, ful dobro dela, pa ne vem, vidi se, da zna, mislim, da ve, no, ona je z tega področja, tako da ful kul. Anže, kje se nas lahko sliši? In tako naprej. Oziroma, kje smo?
Aparatus.si, valjda smo tudi v iTunesih, ne? Pa na Facebooku smo, pa mi so oba na Twitterju. Ja. Jaz sem na mojem slovenskem Twitter accountu Anzet, ne? Ja. Boki ima samo enega.
Boki nahvar. To je to.
Drugače, to je pa to, pa Aparatus valjda lahko podprete, res vsak evro proprije, no? Tako da ful hvala, če greste na aparatus.si/podpri, pa še enkrat vsem hvala, ki ste majice vzeli in pol slike poslali. Ne?
Super, ja.
To res moramo reči.
Hvala sem za podporo pa za poslušanje.
Glih prele sem dobil en mail še enega, ki ima majico, se je slikal.
Še en zraven.
Še en legitimno.
Jaz mi ful pozitivno presenečen, koliko je bilo dejansko teh ljudi, ki so bili dosti pogumni, ne sem, da so majice kupili, ampak da so se slikali dalje.
Ja, pa ne, a ni fajn, ker dejansko folk pošle, tako, da daš lahko faco zraven tega. Res, to je luštno.
Thanks. To je to. Fajn bote, pa se slišimo naslednjič, ne?
Res je.
Čau.